The rich soil, the thriving wetlands, the abundance of plants and animals. This is Nahant Marsh, an area as rich in history as the soil that envelops it.
The first settlers came when it was totally wilderness, and instantly recognized that they were seeing something different when they came up the Mississippi River. They were literally entering what was called the Mississippi Trench. When they came upriver, they saw these incredible high bluffs on each side of the river with beautiful cirque valleys like you could see in the Alps on both sides of the river, matching cirque bluffs to the bottoms.
This area, originally shaped by water and fire and once filled with abundant prairies, has a story to tell.
It was a land of plenty. Here at the mouth of the town of Rockingham, there was a little spot that was called Fishertown. It almost began its own little settlement. It was so prolific for fishing. They reported that they were pulling out catfish that averaged 150, on the top side, 175 pounds, 5 feet long. So it was a paradise for settlers. And of course, Rockingham was one of the earliest town sites. It was founded in the same year as LeClaire and Princeton. It had lots of things going for it, a beautiful location. It had an opposite course across the river for a ferry right to Rock River. Rock River goes 318 miles all the way to Beloit, Wisconsin. It wasn't hard to see the advantage of having a town site right here.
Because of this abundance of natural resources in the area, in 1835, settlers began to lay out a town called Rockingham. The town, situated across from the mouth of the Rock River, between the Mississippi River and Nahant Marsh, was a strategically important port. Although it flourished for a time, repeated flooding led to the demise. By 1847, the town was all but abandoned.
After the town of Rockingham disbanded, the little town of Nahant kind of came into existence. As historians have noted, it was a pretty rough place. The famous gangster John Looney reportedly had some of his largest brothels. Keep in mind, was during the Prohibition era, and so there's a lot of illegal alcohol production and gambling and all the other crimes and things that go along with Prohibition. In 1902, there was a major train robbery here that basically these guys blew a safe to smithereens, and apparently you could hear the blast for miles away. They got away with quite a bit of loot, silver and other things, and held up in a farmhouse here at Nahant for several days before leaving to the Wapsie. The story goes that they had so much stuff that there was no way they could have carried it all on horseback, and so the legend is that there's some treasure buried here on site.
Notorious Nahant, as many historians refer to it, had quite the reputation in its early years. From brothels to train robberies, some will tell you Nahant Marsh had a big part in how the Midwest was won. It became the center of controversy, a battleground over territory, when two sides were trying to determine what would become the county seat.
And of course, another important use of these backwater harbors is, the steamboats of the day, which were the primary means of passage of goods and people. They were wooden, and they deteriorated fast with age, so they were not all that strong, even when in good weather, much less in the middle of ice jams in the middle of the winter. And in 1902, a giant steamboat overwintering ice harbor was built in Nahant Harbor, adjacent to Credit Island. Really, Nahant and Credit Island are all really part of the same water system. But along the Nahant side, there are huge pilings in the ground yet today from that old steamboat harbor. The town of Nahant is just a block long. It just goes from Concord Street up to the tracks, and there's still some of those houses that are left today.
The early settlers were known for being a touch rowdy.
Grandma Edna Brocker Shuri, was born in 1900. Her father, John Brocker, Johann Brocker, had a farm down here somewhere. During World War I, 17 to 19, she was working here in the rail yards, and she had a great interest in photography and having fun.
Grandma Edna also liked being in an area where soldiers passed through on their way to war.
The troops stopped the train here in the rail yard, and of course Grandma's 17, 18, 19 years old with her gal pal posse, and here's all these young men going down to the river to have a swim or a bath, or because you can see the towels in their hands. And she's got a camera, and they're all giggling and riding around and talking to the doughboys. And so yeah, the way I tell it is Grandma chased after troop trains. Picture of her riding her favorite horse, Star. It's pretty much at a full gallop right out here on South Concord. And she looked at that photo without saying, yeah, I got a speeding ticket for riding my horse too fast. That tin horn Rockingham copper, he's just upset because I left him in my dust in his little Ford that one day. He stopped me in town. He found her there the next day. Here's your ticket.
In the years that followed, the gun-toting, law-breaking grannies faded away, and the area transformed into a playground for the next generations.
I was born and raised on South Concord with the Mississippi River as my front yard and the marsh as my backyard. When I grew up, the marsh was someplace, as a kid, was our playground, because living out here we didn't have parks and we didn't have playgrounds, so it was something that was part of my growing up. Then as I got older, it became something that was a benefit because I hunted and trapped it. And trapping, those days, teenagers didn't have jobs like they do now at, grocery stores or fast food places. So I would trap during the fall, and then around Christmas sell my pelts and have some money for Christmas.
Sadly, as the years went by, the area began to deteriorate, the wildlife began to disappear, and the marsh lost its luster.
The marsh just kind of became a dead zone in my neighborhood down here. And then probably in the 90s, I was asked by the mayor if I would be interested to become a board member on the Nahant Marsh with the in association with River Action. At that time, the city got possession of this property because there was a trap range here, and the lake part was full of lead, and the migrating wildlife were dying from lead poisoning and so forth. Then that was really the big start of what the marsh is today.
As more volunteers and organizations became involved, the marsh began to transform, but not without a lot of hard work.
13 acres of the marsh were dredged, and 1 foot of the soils, so most of the, almost 99% of the lead shot was removed. It was a very long process. We had many workers here for many months. But when it was finished and returned to the state that you see it in today, we had maybe a little deeper marsh because we had to excavate some of those soils, but we had a much cleaner marsh, and the waterfowl were not in danger then of ingesting the lead.
For those who grew up here and called the neighboring areas home, it was a difficult process to watch, at least in the beginning.
It was kind of hard to sit here and watch this marsh essentially really being kind of more or less destroyed part of it when they came in with the heavy equipment for the big backhoes and with their little special dump tracks on tracks running around out there, the swamp buggies, hauling the debris out of there that had to be cleaned up. And I mean, then when you looked at the dirt was piled from here at the center all the way down to Wapello Avenue down here, all the way up the other area. It was just amazing how much had to be cleaned out of there, and the process that it took to get rid of all that too. And then after we did all that, there was the restoration work that had to be done.
Slowly but surely, the marsh began to transform into what it is today.
We did the shallow water excavations on the north side of the marsh that aren't so apparent to the general public. And those have potential to be good resting spots for waterfowl, especially in the spring, as well as shorebirds. The other thing I suspect could happen is things like marsh wrens and sedge wrens and some more uncommon species probably are here in more frequency than they were before.
The excavation process came just in time.
But the lead was here. That had to be done because the lead out in there it definitely was killing waterfowl. That's what brought it to the attention, was finding dead geese here. And so you had that issue. Also, we know that muskrats feed on cattails. The cattails in the marsh were contaminated by lead. Muskrat eats the cattails, the muskrats die, and we have bald eagles come here, and if a bald eagle comes here and sees a dead muskrat, they're going to feed on it, and so you have that secondary chance of a bald eagle being poisoned, and it probably happened. And so we had that issue, so that had to be done. And if we didn't do that, that poisoning would just continue to go on and would still be going on to this day.
Once the cleanup effort brought results, the next questions had to be answered. What would become of Nahant? Who would watch over it? What did the future hold?
I think Nahant Marsh maybe comes down to a question of how it should be managed. It comes to management. Currently out here we have a lot of open water, large expanses of cattails, and then more atypically is some of these beaver wetlands and the other wetlands on the other side. So I think depending on how it's managed, if it's pushed more towards the type of habitat, say, that Blanding's turtles might use, that shallow water, a lot of native vegetation, you might see a transformation then that leads to a more, a increase in that type of turtle and populations, or more diversity perhaps in the area. It can be kept in more of an open water habitat. There's all these are decisions that need to be made here locally, but either way, the fact that it is protected and that it's here and it's being managed quite well up to this point, there's hope that at least Blanding's turtles will stay here, and then the other wildlife that utilizes it will hang around.
Right now we've been very lucky and be able to run, like the past 4 years, have summer crews to help control invasives. But if we lose that summer cruise here for 1 or 2 summers, it will be a major setback with invasives, and then we could be losing the ground and losing some of the species that we used to have here at one time.
The cleanup of Nahant is one of historic proportions.
This is the largest EPA toxic waste area that has ever been reclaimed by the federal government, or at least in the day that it was done, it was. I don't know if anyone has superseded it yet. I don't think so. To think that it could go from a point where it was so bad that the EPA would come here and spend millions of dollars cleaning it up, and then to now where it's become a tourist attraction. That's pretty remarkable, and it's all occurred simply because people have had the will to will it so. And it's really important because, as I said, we live in a fast-paced world where we're whizzing 60 miles an hour down the road. We don't see the forest for the trees. We drive through beautiful river vistas here that other people would die to have. They're out our doors every day, and we don't pay any attention to them. Sometimes we need to sit back and understand that this is a very remarkable place.
Even the most experienced environmentalists are amazed at the transformation.
First of all, Nahant Marsh we're so lucky here in the Quad Cities to have that. It's like the biggest urban wetland there is, and what a better place to have a wetland in an urban setting, just because the fact of the educational value with it. All these different people from the city can actually drive within a mile and have it right there, and I think it's really, really cool. We're very lucky. There's not another one that I've ever seen that even comes close. And then with the actual having the educational center there, it's fantastic. And then you got the staff. I mean, from the top down, it's great staff, and gets kids excited and gets them active and gets them appreciating the outdoors, especially wetlands, which obviously help keep the river clean. So it's fantastic.
Wetlands are, first of all, one of the most productive type of ecosystems on the earth. They're kind of akin to tropical rainforest or a coral reef. So that's one of the reasons things come here to breed and feed and live and reproduce. The other reason is that wetlands are just, they're kind of the kidneys of the earth. They filter out pollution, and they do that in a variety of ways. We have, bacteria that live here. We have beavers that live here, and their dams help to filter the water as it's leaving and going back to the river. We have different plants that can actually absorb toxins and trap silt and things like that. And especially these wetlands that are associated with the Mississippi River, they're critical because they're release valves for floodwaters.
We've evolved into a very major nature center here. Not only do we have the classroom and the laboratory for classes that come here, and the trails that have been built and maintained throughout the marsh that allow us to take walks, education walks, and field trips.
That learning is not limited to just younger children.
My thesis research project is to study the genetic diversity of turtles, specifically painted turtles at Nahant Marsh. When I had come out to the marsh fall 2010 and just seen the the wildlife abounding out here, it just seemed really promising to me, and I took a shining to it.
Down here I'm doing turtle research, continuing turtle research really for the third year. I think what attracted me here really is knowing that it was right here in the proximity to the urban areas of the city. And so having that opportunity to come out here, this little nook of nature in the city and see what lives out here still, particularly the turtles are what attracted me. And so, as soon as I got out here and first visited the marsh, I thought I'd like to do some turtle research, sort of piggybacking on some thesis work I had done previously. And so, once I got out here, hopefully, wanted to find something interesting and rare, but really just wanted to begin inventorying the population and seeing what was out here. And then, lo and behold, after about a season of work, towards the end of it, I came across a small population of Blanding's turtles. And that really was the neatest thing for me, to find out here. The Blanding's turtle, it's one of those things that I've only heard about in passing, but had never seen growing up. I was the kind of guy always out in the wilderness, out in the marshes and lakes, and never saw them. And so I soon found out that they were state endangered in Illinois and then state threatened in Iowa. And I had heard about some previous research done here and some sightings of Blanding's turtles. And so when I came down here and began the inventory process, found the Blanding's turtles, which again is just kind of a little treasure here.
It certainly is a place to commune with nature.
Nahant is still incredibly diverse. With over 400 different types of plants that have been documented here, something like 35 different kinds of mammals, and just a whole host of other rare and endangered plants and animals that are found here. It's pretty incredible. That it's a real testament that nature is able to survive even the harshest conditions.
I think a lot of, city slickers, city folk, they don't get a chance to get out into, a natural environment like this. Initially some of them may feel that, oh, this is yucky, it's just a swamp, it's gross. But, once you come out here, once or twice or, multiple times, you really start reconnecting back to, the natural element. That's just something that, the human beings have really missed out on a lot of the last, 200 years or so of industrialization and intensive city dwelling. Lost connection with the countryside.
One thing that's real interesting to note is that, when the first pioneers came here, there were very few trees except in groves out far on the prairies and sometimes along the tops of the bluffs. But really it was prairie almost all the way down to the river. Matter of fact, I read a quote the other night that at Buffalo Township, which is adjoining this area, there's now 5 times as much timber as there was in the 1800s when the settlers first came. Much of that was planted by them because they needed wood so much. I mean, every steamboat had to have umpteen cords of cordwood just to get it to the next stop on the river. Settlers needed to cut trees down for logs for housing, to burn in their wood stoves. Trees were important, so they actually planted a lot of these.
The Nahant Marsh is a jewel in the west end in the eastern Iowa, I would say, but it's especially a jewel in West Davenport. It's a place where you can bring your family, doesn't cost you any money. It's got trails, it's got wildlife. I mean, it's a day, you can spend a day out here with your kids and you can move back into a time as when I was a kid. This is what the marsh looked like when I was a kid, and that's been, I'm 72, so it's been a good number of years.
The serene surroundings of Nahant Marsh bring a sense of tranquility, an almost certain bond with nature for all those who stop by.
Instead of thinking of it as a wasteland of space that needs to be filled. Now we understand better that it's a place to be preserved. As I said, for bird watching especially, we are in the catbird seat. This is the Mississippi River flyway. You know, 45% of the waterfowl in North America fly through here twice a year. 35% of all species of birds are winging their way.
I feel kind of privileged in a way. When we started, we were concerned about the ecological impact of visitors and people and you know, folks running around on bike paths and trails and those sorts of things. And up to this point, those efforts have, I'm not saying that people aren't encouraged to come out here and can't come out here, but the development's been done in a relatively environmentally responsible way.
It's extremely important because it's one thing just to see, you know, how beautiful this is, but to really appreciate it, you know, how amazing this is. You know, it's good to know more about the biology, the ecology of this, you know, this environment here, and also to, you know, really appreciate the struggles, I guess, that the plants and animals and other wildlife here went through to survive those many years of pollution.
What's really great about Nahant is that we are so close to the city of Davenport and really so close to the Quad Cities. We're centrally located. We're right next to I-280. So people from an urban setting can get out here and experience what this place has to offer and really experience what Iowa, what the Midwest was like 200 years ago. We have college classes that meet here on site. We have all kinds of great research projects that are currently happening, and students are able to make use of the marsh for those reasons. We have a master conservationist program. We have a wide variety of different things that people can get involved with the marsh and really learn to appreciate, not just appreciate nature, but appreciate our place in nature. We've been able to create all kinds of opportunities for people to learn out here. We've got everything from toddlers on up to senior citizens we do programs for. And what we're really trying to do is create stewards, not just for this generation, but stewards of the natural world for generations to come.
Divine destiny, manifest destiny of America when we stopped being a clone of England and we became the great American West. And those people recognized it when they first saw it. We've grown too used to it to understand it and appreciate it. And fortunately, places like this help people get back to that scene again.
What's so significant about Nahant as a wetland is that first of all, it's urban, and there's very few urban wetlands of this size that are left. The other thing that's so interesting about Nahant is that it's survived. 90% of the wetlands in Iowa have been destroyed. 54%, 55% nationally of the original wetlands are gone now. And the fact that this place was able to survive two settlements, you know, we had the city of Rockingham, the town of Nahant, and all kinds of other pressures is just remarkable.
Destiny or determination, Nahant Marsh is a glowing example of how dedication, teamwork, and a desire to preserve nature can bring life to a once forgotten land. News.